Today we're going to talk about sheathing. That's your OSB, that's your plywood, and that's your cardboard. So last week we touched on zip system, which is technically a form of sheathing. But today we're going to discuss the more common forms along with newer technologies that are starting to come up and become more popular. All right, let's watch a video.
We're going to watch a Matt Risinger video, and he's talking about the differences between OSB sheathing and plywood sheathing options.
Hey, there he is. He's talking about the cardboard right there.
Yep, Thermoply.
Yeah, that's the green stuff. That's the weakest of stuff.
The green, yes.
Yeah,
that is.
okay.
My gosh, people actually use that.
So yeah, he's in this video, he's discussing the three most commonly used forms of sheathing.
Which you discussed in the beginning of this.
Right.
So he is all for plywood and OSB, and he is not a fan of Thermoply at all. So you can see in the house behind him, the first 2 to 3 feet, maybe 2 feet of sheathing is plywood. And what he uses above that is OSB.
And you'll notice he's got his sheathing joints taped as well to produce an air barrier or to create an air barrier. Which is
So that plywood at the bottom looks a little greenish.
Yeah, it looks like it's weather treated plywood.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's showing so that's the stuff you get at Home Depot.
That's the outdoor rated.
Yeah.
It's more expensive. Yeah. It's a lot more expensive. I think it's pressure treated, and it's also treated with some sort of chemicals to make it resistant to termites and all that.
Okay.
It's the wood that you need to use for your fences. That's the greenish wood.
Exterior grade. Okay.
Yeah, and decks and anything else that you have on the outside.
Yeah, and so the reason he explains in this video, the reason he's using the plywood at the base is because plywood can resist water much more than OSB. OSB will swell up significantly if water is introduced to it, which is why you have to have that weather-resistant barrier around it, that Tyvek or your zip system, which has the WRB integrated in order to prevent the OSB from getting wet.
I was surprised when I read this. OSB was invented in the late 1970s.
Yeah, that is surprising.
So plywood was used up till then. Even in our house, I don't believe they used plywood, because when we cut out a hole for our dryer, it looked like some sort of particle board. Maybe it wasn't OSB, it was some early version of it.
Yeah.
Because it didn't look like plywood.
We didn't really save that scrap, and I think we just assumed it was OSB because we didn't realize that OSB was not invented that long ago.
Yeah.
But it was probably plywood because it was your typical 1/2-inch 7/16 sheet.
Yeah.
Whatever it was with the asphalt felt.
But as soon as it was invented, people very quickly switched over from plywood to that because of the huge price difference. It's about half the price, I think. And
the strength of OSB is surprisingly good because it is the way the wood chips are integrated. It's kind of like Tyvek. It's creating this super strong joint because of all these overlaps.
And everything in between is a resin or a glue or something, which has
strength in itself. Yeah, adds to the strength.
But it's terrible at repelling water or resisting water compared to plywood.
OSB is,
yes. Yeah. It's actually, if you think about it, they claim it's a greener choice because plywood, like this table, for example, it's using a thin ply of an entire sheet of wood, and everything on the inside can be scraps and whatever. But OSB is using all the remnants that don't go into making plywood.
Yeah, so it's very much a recycled material.
Yes. I mean, you can use the sawdust to make MDF, but all the chips, you can use that to make OSB.
Yeah, there's a difference between MDF sawdust and OSB as far as strength goes.
Yeah.
Having the actual wood chips with the resin makes it much stronger.
Yeah.
And think about MDF and how it absorbs water, even more so than OSB.
That's true.
I guess it's like different levels. Plywood, then OSB, and then MDF.
Well, solid wood at the beginning.
Yeah, that's true. But nobody uses that as sheathing.
Yeah.
That's more your framing, lumber.
So we covered OSB and plywood to a certain degree.
Yeah, we just briefly wanted to talk about those because those are the OSB is obviously the most commonly used.
And that's what's used on zip panels too.
Yes, that's OSB.
Yeah, I don't think many people or anyone uses plywood anymore as sheathing.
I think that's a higher end
Yeah.
use. Or maybe if it's going to be exposed to the elements.
But even if it is higher end, I feel like people would just switch to the thicker zip panels now.
Right, yeah, zip.
The brown zip.
Mm-hmm. And zip is so commonly used, it makes me wonder why this next sheathing we're going to talk about is not as commonly used, because it seems like a very similar product in some ways.
So this video we're going to be watching is a Thermoply structured sheathing video, and it's manufactured by Ox Industries.
Ox Engineering. Yeah, so Thermoply it's called fiberboard, right?
Fiberboard or cardboard.
It's from wood cellulose.
Yes. So it's just layers and layers of cellulose, like compressed cellulose.
Yes.
It's kind of like tissue paper. Like you can buy 2-ply tissue paper or 3-ply tissue paper. That's why it's called Thermoply. So it's like plies of cardboard.
So like I said earlier, a Thermoply is similar to zip in the sense that it's a structural wall bracing, or it's a sheathing. It's a water-resistant barrier, and it's an air barrier.
If taped.
Yes,
exactly.
if installed properly, taped and everything. And they have installation guides on how to do the taping and things. So it's a very similar product.
Sure.
So the two main differences in this product are, one, the material it's made out of, and two, the thickness of the material.
Yeah, so zip is made out of OSB, wood chips. This is made out of cellulose fibers.
Yeah. And zip is 7/16 inch thick at its thinnest. And Thermoply is this red Thermoply.
It's 0.078, the thinnest, at the thinnest.
Yeah, that's the green stuff.
Yes. So
but the red stuff, which is what we have like the structural ratings for and stuff.
Yeah. But you were saying like the thinnest zip versus the thinnest Thermoply.
So the red grade is about an 1/8 inch thick material.
0.13?
0.113, yeah.
That's
0.125.
0.125.
It's less than an 1/8 inch, technically.
So not only the thickness, their weight is also really different. So a 4x8 OSB sheet weighs 45 pounds. A 4x8 Thermoply sheet weighs 13 pounds.
Yes.
So you can carry a big stack of these to your site.
Absolutely. And so think about ease of installation.
Yes.
I mean, one person can set it up and staple it in fairly easily, whereas an OSB sheet is going to require two people sometimes, or one very strong person. So it has some benefits, especially in a DIY sense, perhaps an anti-contractor home sense.
Mm-hmm. So here they're showing what's needed to install it, and it's just staples.
You see how flimsy it is when they're bringing it. So I guess if you're bringing it on site, you have to be careful not to bolt it in half.
Yeah,
which is pretty crazy thing. And here you see him stapling it with a staple gun, and they have it marked for everywhere you need to staple. And they have in their instruction guide how you need to staple. You can't just staple it in any random order. You have to go vertically along your 16-inch on center studs, and then you go
horizontal. You can't do just the corners, secure it in place, and then staple everything else. And that's because it can bow. It's so flimsy. So if you staple just the corners, it may not sit flat with your studs. That's the reason.
Yes. Yeah, and sometimes you have to actually add studs where you may need extra fasteners.
That's right. Yeah.
And so this snapshot's kind of important. When Thermoply is used in a non-structural application, it's stapled at 6 inches on center. 6 inches on the perimeter, there's 12 inches in the middle. When it is used as lateral bracing, it has to be stapled at 3 inches on center everywhere.
Even in between the board itself.
So last week we talked about the penetrations on a zip system, like whenever you're stapling or nailing it in. Those penetrations needing to be covered up with their liquid flashing. Well, the fasteners are 2 to 3 times as many.
Yeah.
Maybe 4 times as many fasteners. And they're claiming this is a weather-resistant barrier as well. I feel like
crazy.
They need to tape over all those seams as well.
That's ridiculous number of staples that you need on a single sheet.
You have to be careful not to overstaple anything because your material is so thin.
Yeah.
You're losing the structural
integrity.
integrity.
You're saying by overstapling, you mean like going too far into the material?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just think if you overstaple a few of them, you're losing the structural integrity. And that goes back to an installation issue.
Yeah.
Where the people installing this out in the field have to know exactly how many staples they need to use, how deep they need to go, and be very careful.
And we went to a couple of sites up in North Dallas last week and the week before that, and we saw what a bad job they did installing this Thermoply. There were so many overdriven staples, and they're not going to come back and fix that.
Similar to the video we watched about zip being installed improperly.
Yeah.
So it's an installation issue. But this 1/8 inch material is kind of, it throws some red flags in general when you see it.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how do they get away with that?
Yeah.
Especially when the IRC talks about bracing and sheathing being a minimum requirement of 3/8 inches thick. I'm not sure how they get away with this. Mm-hmm. Now, is this, they claim that Thermoply is an adequate lateral brace or sheathing material to prevent your studs from racking.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, do you need some extra strapping or some bracing of
like
your
cross
studs?
bracing or something
in order to...
From what I've read, yes, you need to have extra studs if you're using this material, as opposed to if you're using OSB, you can have like more wider spaced studs. I don't think you can have 24-inch center studs if you're going to use this.
No, because it has to be 16-inch on center, yeah.
Yeah, but you could use 16-inch on center studs if you were using zip.
But like the house we went and looked at, it was 16 inches even on the exterior walls.
Yes.
I think 24 is an older standard.
Yeah. So the other thing they are really proud of is that they're stable priced. They say that OSB and plywood can fluctuate in prices very commonly, but the price of Thermoply never changes. So it's easier to budget for this in your job.
How can it never change?
That's what they say, that it's
supply and
promoted
demand
everywhere.
Yeah, I know building materials are susceptible to supply and demand around specific areas, but something like Thermoply, isn't that susceptible to the same?
Maybe the cellulose fibers they're made of doesn't change in price, or the company has decided to absorb that change in cost if it does change, but they promote it as a stable priced material.
Interesting. If your staple gun misfires, they're showing how you would need to cover that up with their proprietary tape, or an adequate tape, let's say. And they're also showing this joint, which is a lap joint.
Yeah.
So there's two ways of installing this. You can either install it as a butt joint or as a lap joint.
So if it's butt jointed, then I don't think you need to leave a gap, because this material is not going to expand and contract as much as OSB is. You can just like set it up right next to the other sheet of Thermoply. But in order for this material to be a proper air barrier, a butt jointed Thermoply has to be taped. These people, the Ox Engineering Products Company, claims that you don't need Tyvek.
Right. It's like zip system. You don't need it.
Yeah.
But
no one
zip
really
system...
puts Tyvek over zip. It's whenever we've seen this installation of this Thermoply, we've always seen Tyvek over it. It's like people don't trust this to be a proper water and air barrier.
There's people that don't trust zip too.
Yeah.
And put Tyvek over that. Mm-hmm. So it has a WRB on both sides and a perm rating of 0.6 for the red grade, the standard structural grade. So here we have a gentleman using a staple gun and kneeling in between the studs. And with an 1/8 inch thick material, if you're a large enough person, you will cause
large enough, anyone would be
to collapse. Yeah,
a child would be able to.
That's crazy.
Bend that.
I mean, I guess sometimes you're framing walls and then lifting them up, but often your walls are already framed, so you're not going to run into this issue. And you're also not...
But what happens when it is up there and by mistake you lean
that's
too
true.
far into the wall and just bend it?
Yeah, well, they have on their installation guide, they have some recommendations for what to do if your thermoply is damaged, and oftentimes it's just replace the panel.
Yeah. So I was looking through forums of people who had used Thermoply, whether they recommend it or not. And one guy was saying that on all his job sites, whenever they would have Thermoply and leave at night, they'd come back in the morning and there were kids who had just kicked holes through the Thermoply.
Oh,
just because they could. And they had to replace all those panels.
That's messed up. Yeah, because if you have a hole that's larger than 3 inches,
you have
like due to damage, you have to replace the panel based on their recommendation and thus to get their warranty. Things like that.
Okay.
A lot of negative about this, but I'm not so much against it. Like I think there's a lot of unnecessary hate about it. I think it's just people are just scared of it. Kind of like the technology that the zip system is a technology that a lot of people are not comfortable with. They'd rather use more traditional methods of WRBs.
Yeah, maybe it's just something you have to wrap your head around. And an 1/8 inch sheathing is enough, maybe.
According to their testing results, they claim that this is an adequate structural bracing for your house.
Yeah.
So they've done the test. They've proven that it works.
Did you see the photo of the house in Dallas that was taken last year when the tornado went through and it had Thermoply on? It was completely ripped off.
I did. That's from Jordan Smith's video.
That was in Jordan Smith's video. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is using both green and red?
Yeah, so it looks like he's showing a house. He's actually showing how sheathing works. It prevents your studs from racking. But behind him, he's got an example of a house that is using Thermoply as their sheathing. And it looks like he's using both the green, which is the light structural grade, and the red, which is the standard structural grade.
Yeah. And then blue is the high structural grade. It's 0.135 inches
which you
in thickness.
Never see used. Yeah. It's usually the red stuff.
Why not just, if you have to use Thermoply, just go to the blue stuff and use that.
Right. Or at least the red. Don't use the light.
Just don't use the green.
Light structural grade.
This house.
Yeah, so here's the photo.
Ooh.
Man, this is like a reaction.
Yeah.
So it looks like this house used a combination of the green and red Thermoply. And it looks like a tornado ravaged this home. Yeah, so in our area, which is the DFW area, we're technically in what is called Tornado Alley. And you would think that something like Thermoply would be banned in this area because of its...
It's not as good of a shear material as OSB.
But they claim it is as good.
They claim it is, yeah.
But then you see photos like this. But I'm sure you could find photos of houses with OSB or even zip system
that have been torn apart. Yeah.
Unless Hubbard took them all down.
Yeah.
So he is, in this video, he's actually showing an example. He's comparing two different homes. He's comparing one with zip system sheathing versus one with Thermoply sheathing. And he's saying, don't use Thermoply.
Don't even buy a house that was built with Thermoply.
Yeah.
So this photo is showing how the wall separated from the sill plate just completely peeled off it and moved towards the inside, the Thermoply. And then he goes across the street to a house that was built in zip.
Using his favorite stuff.
But he does criticize all the taping that they've done.
Right.
Which is good. I mean,
just like we talked about last week with when that one guy went and walked the job site of a random house that had issues with the taping. The taping is always the issue.
It looks like they have a lot of bubbling. Look at that. That's not good. That's not the way it should be installed. And all these taping every single joint.
It looks like they just went crazy with the tape. Just as a CYA thing.
Yeah, that was definitely, look at that.
Oh, yikes.
That was definitely not installed properly. Oh my God.
And I mean, I feel like you'd have to walk 10 job sites in order to find one that is installed correctly.
Yeah. Now this would probably fail eventually if, I mean, all the water can go through those seams and eat into that OSB.
Yeah, are they wrapping this?
So this, I mean, just because you use zip doesn't mean it's a good house. This could fail earlier than the Thermoply house.
Yeah.
If the Thermoply house was built properly.
Yeah, just because you use Thermoply doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
But I feel like the 7/16 inch material is going to have a better shear strength than
a better shear strength, but it's much less water resistant than Thermoply.
Yeah. But I think this video is comparing shear strength, really.
Yeah, but how many times does a tornado go through the area versus the amount of times it rains?
It depends on the area, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying like in Texas,
Yeah,
once
it does
a year
rain
you
a
might
lot.
have a tornado come through.
Yeah, just once a year.
But this house is more susceptible to rain because of all the
Right.
bad taping.
What's the likelihood the tornado is going to hit your house
Yeah.
or be close enough in order to cause that much lateral movement versus how often it's going to rain and that water get behind and cause rot.
Yeah.
But in general, he's just saying the prices of these two homes are very similar. They're selling for the same amount, but to him, one is clearly better than the other.
I saw this interesting quote on another forum. The person was obviously for Thermoply, and he said, Thermoply is actually a better underlayment than OSB, but OSB is just marketed better.
Who markets OSB?
Zip.
Everybody?
Or anyone who's trying to make or convince homeowners to make the switch from plywood to OSB back in the 1970s. OSB is a good thing. It's marketed really well.
Yeah.
But it's wood chips that can swell and rot with like the smallest amount of water.
Yeah, it's
Thermoply just isn't marketed well because of the appearance. The moment you see that 1/8-inch thick material, you're like, nope, I don't want that on my house.
Yeah, and I guess Zip System is an example of a product that is marketed incredibly well.
Yes.
They have a lot of people on their sides, and they have the product to back it up. It seems like Thermoply, this Ox Engineering as a company, is not doing as well of a job to debunk all the myths. In Jordan Smith's video, he references a test done by the APA, which is the Engineered Wood Association. And they do test on all different sheathing materials, and in their test they prove that Thermoply can be under-designed 23 to 39% structurally. So it's not as strong.
So is that false advertising? False testing? Or they had some weird ideal conditions when they tested it and came out?
I think this test is very interesting to look at because
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it shows how whenever they do the lateral load test, how it fails and it folds like plywood does. But what I don't like about this test is that they specify that the way they fastened this Thermoply is 6 inches on center, which is not what Ox Engineering specifies. They specify double the amount of staples.
3 inches.
Yeah. So if you were to add twice as many staples, would it meet the requirements that Ox Engineering actually says it does? I think it would.
That's a good point.
So I think you really have to look into these tests and make sure that they're installing it the way it's supposed to be installed.
Wow.
According to the manufacturers.
How did they get away with this test then if they didn't install the product properly?
Well, they claimed that they use it on the same test assembly that they use to rate all wood structural panels.
Okay.
So I wonder, like, they're just testing the shear strength of it in general, and
that is shocking.
Yeah, I feel like you have to install it the way that Ox Engineering.
Yeah.
In order to, it's just like installing any product incorrectly. Like let's say DuPont comes out with a claim that Zip is not doing what it claims it does whenever they run a test and they tweak things.
They do that with the nail hole test.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny to watch because Zip System has their own nail hole test and then Tyvek has their own nail hole test, and they both tweak their tests in a certain way to make the other person's product seem worse.
And it goes back to the marketing, the way your product is marketed. Perhaps the OSB marketers have done such a good job of bad talking Thermoply that everyone just is turned off by it.
Yeah, I think it's a visual thing. Like for someone to see that, even it's not just a marketing, it's the visual aspect of seeing an 1/8-inch material, a cardboard material, a flimsy thing stapled onto your house. It's the staples used instead of nails. It's the thickness. It's the appearance. All that is very difficult to market. Even if it works better than OSB with the right number of studs and staples, it is very hard to mentally get over that appearance of the material.
Which is exactly what we were talking about with zip system. It's very hard for people to get over not using a house wrap and just using this tape or the liquid flashing.
Yeah, because they say, how can a tape keep air out of my building, keep water out of my building? I'm not going to trust a tape. If you go on their website, they have a lot of products. Thermoply is just one of their many products. They have structural insulation. They have polyiso insulation.
Yeah,
they've got so many things. Like just how Zip System has their Zip R sheathing. So it's the zip with a polyiso backing. These people have the same thing. ISO red, polyiso insulation.
They also have the construction tapes. They have a flexible tape. All that stuff. They have a
drainage wrap.
I don't think they have a liquid flashing yet, but I assume that's coming.
The one thing I was a little concerned about when I was reading the descriptions of their insulated sheathing boards, they use polyiso that has been reinforced with fiberglass. Why wouldn't you just use polyiso as is? Why do you have to taint it with fiberglass insulation?
Yeah, is that to make it more rigid?
Or to cheapen it? Cheapen to lower production costs?
Well, you say reinforced makes it seem like it's too...
Well, that's how they're marketing it. All their insulated structural sheathing is all reinforced with fiberglass. But from what we've seen during our insulation review, polyiso is far superior to fiberglass when it comes to flame resistance and what was it called? The thermal drift, all that stuff.
An actual R value.
An actual R value too. So I don't know why they would do that. This is just a small anecdote that I wanted to tell you. Toll Brothers, it's a large construction company it's in Boston. They have almost fully switched to Thermoply from OSB on all their luxury homes and like mid-range homes too.
Wow.
And they did not install it properly. And there was severe bowing of walls in their homes, and they've got lots of lawsuits up there in Boston. That's what this article is saying.
Oh, okay.
But there was one very funny thing that I read at the bottom of this. They did a cutting test through one of these homes. So they built up a wall with vinyl siding, Thermoply, 3 inches of insulation, and drywall. And they took a normal box cutter and they tried to cut through this exterior wall. Just imagine that's your house. It took them 6 minutes to get inside the house. Or at least cut a small hole into this.
Because vinyl siding can be easily cut with a box cutter, because 1/8 inch fiberboard can be easily cut through with a box cutter, and then drywall.
3 inches of insulation.
Wait, it was fiberglass insulation?
I don't know. They didn't say that. They just said insulation.
Or even if it's rigid foam, that's what you're supposed to cut it with. And then...
you can just punch through drywall if you want. 6 minutes. So they were saying, how is this theft proof? But then the makers of Thermoply came back and said, that's ridiculous, because you can talk about a window too. You can break through a window to get into a house.
Yeah.
That's not the purpose of a window, though.
In less than 6 minutes.
Yeah. Yep. So that's their defense.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah.
So one question I have about how Thermoply is used is how you attach your exterior cladding.
Yes, because you're not supposed to nail anything into Thermoply.
Because it's 1/8 inches.
Yeah. They say it should not be used as a backing for vinyl siding or anything.
So whenever you're putting your hardy board or whatever on the side of your building, you have to hit the studs?
You have to hit the studs. Or you need some sort of blocking that goes through the Thermoply into your studs, and then that has to be attached to your blocking.
Or do you use a furring strip or something?
Blocking furring strip, metal furring strip, anything like that.
Okay.
You cannot attach it to your Thermoply. Although some people do, you're not supposed to.
Yeah, so that's definitely a concern.
Yeah.
To think about. If you're considering using something like Thermoply, you have to also consider what you're going to be cladding your building in.
Yeah. So most people use thin brick, like all the houses
brick
over
veneer.
here around here, and that has an air gap and furring strips.
But it still has to be anchored to, but it's anchored to studs.
To the studs with furring strips. Yeah. That's how they get around it.
Excellent.
So what do we think about Thermoply?
We've got a real case study going, so we can watch it as it goes. It's a house in Tornado Alley. I'm not sold on being against it.
Yeah.
Like everyone else is. I want to be the contrarian that says, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong.
Maybe it's just a new product that you have to wrap your head around and say, okay, I'll get over the thickness.
Who knows? In 20 years, we may all be using
Thermoply.
1/8-inch thick material.
Yeah.
Maybe Zippel's cut it down to 1/8 inch. It's like, hey, we did some tests and we figured it out.
They come up with a new material, something better than OSB that can be sandwiched to an 1/8 inch.
Like steel.
Like steel.
Cold rolled steel.
Okay.
All right, that's it.
That's it.
All right. Thanks for joining
watching.
us, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.